she asked Barron to remove the hat or leave the restaurant. The words were firm, yet polite, but the message was clear. The MAGA hat had no place in her establishment. In that brief moment, Barron was thrust into a confrontation. He could have taken off the hat and stayed. Or he could walk out. But for Barron, the decision wasn't just about the hat. It was about his dignity, about the way he was being treated. The tension in the room was palpable. Other patrons turned their heads, some looked on in confusion, while others seemed to nod in approval, as if agreeing with the manager's decision. But Barron wasn't going to simply comply. His family's politics had long been a source of both admiration and hate, and Barron, now in his late teens, was learning how to navigate that complex world. He wasn't just the son of Donald Trump. He was an individual, one with his own sense of right and wrong. And in this moment, he wasn't going to let anyone take away his right to be himself. The situation had escalated quickly, and the manager's insistence was only heightening the drama. But why had this small piece of clothing, a red hat, become such a point of contention? Why was Barron, just a teenager, being asked to leave? Was it truly about the hat, or was there something deeper at play? The atmosphere was now charged, and all eyes were on Barron. What he would do next would set the tone for how this incident would unfold. As Barron's situation began to play out in real time, the reaction from the other patrons in the restaurant was immediate. Some were quietly watching, unsure of how to react. Others were vocal, some nodding in agreement with the manager's stance, and others quietly muttering about the unfair treatment Barron was receiving. However, it wasn't just the people inside the restaurant who were watching. Within minutes, word of the incident spread beyond the walls of the restaurant. Social media erupted. Hashtags like #BoycottRestaurant and #JusticeForBarron quickly started trending across platforms. The incident, which seemed small and contained at first, was now part of a much larger conversation about politics, symbols, and public figures. In the digital age, even a small incident can be amplified into a massive public debate. For many of Barron's supporters, it was about more than just the hat. It was about freedom of expression and the right to wear what you believe in. The MAGA hat, for better or worse, had become a symbol of political identity. Some felt that Barron was being unfairly targeted simply for wearing a symbol of his father's political movement, even though he had no direct involvement in the restaurant's controversy. But, of course, not everyone agreed. On the other side, there were plenty of voices who felt that the restaurant had done the right thing. For them, the MAGA hat wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a representation of the divisive policies that defined Donald Trump's presidency. Some felt that wearing the hat in certain public spaces, especially in more liberal-leaning areas, was an aggressive statement. To them, Barron wasn't just a young man enjoying a meal. He was the son of a controversial figure who had left a deep mark on the nation's politics. The nation was now divided, and the incident was being debated everywhere. Television channels, radio shows, and podcasts picked up the story. Analysts from both sides of the political spectrum weighed in on whether the restaurant's actions were justified or if Barron had been unfairly treated. It became a debate about freedom of expression, tolerance, and how symbols can affect society. What started as a simple act of dining out had spiraled into a national conversation that would dominate headlines for days to come. But Barron, in the midst of all this turmoil, was no longer a passive observer. As the social media storm raged on, Barron's next move would determine the narrative. He had the power to either escalate the situation or take control. And what happened next surprised everyone. In a move that stunned everyone in the room, Barron stood up, his face calm but his posture firm. He didn't shout or raise his voice. Instead, he turned to the manager, who was standing a few feet away. Barron's demeanor was composed, and his voice, when he spoke, was steady and measured. "I'll take my business elsewhere," Barron said, his words clear, but not confrontational. "But I think you should think about why you're doing this." With that, Barron didn't storm out of the restaurant in anger, but instead, he calmly walked toward the door, with the eyes of everyone in the restaurant on him. It wasn't just the manager he was addressing, it was everyone in the room. He had just made a bold statement, not only about his right to wear the hat but about the unfair treatment he had received because of it. Before leaving, Barron turned to the other patrons. His calm yet assertive voice echoed through the room as he addressed the diners. He explained that his choice to wear the MAGA hat wasn't about provoking anyone. It was just a hat, an article of clothing, but to some, it had become a political battleground. Barron reminded the diners that regardless of one's political beliefs, everyone deserved to be treated with respect. This was the turning point. Barron didn't let anger guide him. Instead, he chose to stand his ground with dignity. His words struck a chord with some patrons, who nodded in agreement. Others were left speechless, caught off guard by his composure. And some, those who had been silent up until then, now began to murmur among themselves. The manager, seeing the shift in the room, looked uncomfortable. She had been in control, or so she thought. But Barron's quiet defiance had challenged the status quo. It wasn't just the hat anymore. It was about respect, fairness, and freedom of choice. And as Barron left the restaurant, the real question was not just whether he had been thrown out. It was about what message the incident had sent to the rest of the country. Barron had turned the tables, but would others see his actions as the powerful statement they were? When the story of Barron's exit from the restaurant hit social media, it was met with a firestorm of responses. The debate didn't just stop with Barron's actions. It opened up a deeper conversation about political symbols, personal choice, and the role of public figures in shaping public perception. The reactions were swift and polarized. On one side, Barron's supporters hailed his calm, measured response. They admired how he handled the situation with such maturity, especially considering the high level of pressure he must have felt. Many pointed out that he was just a young man trying to enjoy a meal, and it wasn't fair to judge him solely based on his family's politics. They praised Barron for standing up for his right to be himself, without apologizing or compromising. For them, Barron had emerged as a symbol of dignity and strength. But on the other side, the backlash came quickly. Critics of Barron's family saw his choice of clothing as an endorsement of the political division that had been so deeply entrenched during Donald Trump's presidency. To them, the MAGA hat was more than just a fashion statement, it was a symbol of all the policies and beliefs they opposed. Some went as far as to accuse Barron of being complicit in his father's controversial agenda, simply by wearing the hat. They argued that his actions were part of a larger pattern of behavior that perpetuated the division in the country. The restaurant itself stood by its decision, issuing a statement that defended the manager's actions. The statement explained that the restaurant was committed to creating an environment that was welcoming for all patrons, and it reiterated that the decision to ask Barron to remove the hat was not about politics, but about maintaining the atmosphere they wished to cultivate. However, many customers and critics saw this explanation as insufficient. They felt that the restaurant was using this as a way to avoid taking responsibility for its actions. What followed was an outpouring of support for Barron from people who didn't necessarily agree with his father's politics but believed in his right to wear whatever he wanted. On the other hand, the critics continued to argue that Barron's actions were emblematic of the larger societal issues they had with his family's politics. As the incident continued to make headlines, it became clear that this wasn't just about Barron Trump and his MAGA hat. The situation had exposed a much larger issue: the growing divide in American society. What had once been a simple case of a young man trying to have a meal had become a metaphor for the polarized state of the nation. And Barron, unknowingly, had become a figurehead for this divide. The incident raised crucial questions about how symbols, like the MAGA hat, can affect the way people are treated. To some, the hat represented a political ideology that they rejected, while to others it was a sign of pride. It wasn't just about what the hat stood for, it was about how deeply it resonated with people's beliefs, for better or worse. Barron's experience also underscored the challenges faced by public figures, particularly those who are constantly in the spotlight due to their family's notoriety. Barron wasn't just a regular teenager. He was the son of one of the most controversial figures in modern American history. Because of that, he was often seen through the lens of his father's actions and beliefs. Whether he liked it or not, he was constantly scrutinized, and every move he made was analyzed and dissected. But what made this incident so significant was the way Barron handled it. Instead of reacting with anger, as many might have done in his situation, he chose to remain calm and composed. His actions spoke volumes. It wasn't just a political statement, it was a demonstration of maturity, of standing up for your rights, no matter what others may think. The media frenzy surrounding Barron Trump's restaurant incident didn't die down after the initial wave of reactions. If anything, it intensified. Cable news networks, online publications, and radio shows quickly picked up the story, and soon it was being dissected from every angle possible. The focus wasn't just on Barron's actions, but on the broader implications of what had happened. Media outlets from across the political spectrum weighed in. Some were sympathetic to Barron, arguing that he was unjustly treated based on his family name and political affiliation. They framed him as a young man who was caught in the crossfire of a much larger political war, one that had been raging for years, fueled by the division between the left and right in America. For them, Barron's stance wasn't just about the hat. It was about standing up to intolerance, about making a statement in a world that seemed increasingly hostile to differing opinions. On the flip side, media outlets with more liberal leanings criticized Barron's choice to wear the MAGA hat, and by extension, they criticized his family's influence on American politics. To them, the hat symbolized everything they opposed: racial and cultural division, nationalism, and policies they saw as harmful. They framed Barron's actions as yet another example of his family's disregard for the feelings and rights of others. For them, Barron's defiance wasn't seen as admirable, it was seen as an endorsement of the divisive rhetoric that had marked his father's time in office. As the debate unfolded, some outlets went even further, inviting political analysts, psychologists, and public relations experts to discuss the implications of the incident. Some argued that Barron, despite his young age, had become an unwitting player in a larger media spectacle, one that he might not have been fully prepared for. Others questioned whether it was appropriate for a young man like Barron to be caught in such a storm of political controversy in the first place, asking whether he was being treated unfairly due to his family's status. But regardless of the stance the media took, one thing was clear. Barron's actions had sparked a nationwide conversation about the role of symbols in our daily lives and the power they hold. The MAGA hat, which had once been just a piece of merchandise, had now become a flashpoint for debates on freedom of expression, political polarization, and the limits of tolerance in public spaces. In this heated media environment, Barron's family, particularly his father, Donald Trump, made sure to voice their support for him. Donald Trump, known for never shying away from public statements, took to social media to express his pride in Barron's calm and composed reaction. He reaffirmed that his son had every right to wear the hat and should not have been treated differently because of it. The Trump family's public support for Barron only added fuel to the fire, with both critics and supporters rallying behind the incident. But Barron himself remained relatively quiet in the days following the incident. While his father and supporters defended him publicly, Barron stayed out of the media spotlight, opting for a more personal, private reflection on what had happened. For him, the incident wasn't just about the public outcry, it was about understanding what it meant to be part of such a high-profile family and the responsibility that came with it. As weeks passed, the incident began to fade from the headlines, but its impact lingered. Barron Trump's experience in that Washington, D.C. restaurant had transformed from a single moment of confrontation to a symbol of the larger societal and political tensions in America. The MAGA hat had become more than just a political symbol, it was a reflection of the division, anger, and partisanship that had consumed the nation for years. And Barron, though still a young man, had become an unexpected catalyst for that conversation. For Barron, the whole experience was eye-opening. He had always been sheltered from the harshness of public scrutiny, but now, he was seeing firsthand how his family's political history had shaped the way the world viewed him. As the son of a polarizing figure, Barron would always be under the microscope. Every action, every statement, and every choice he made would be analyzed and criticized, whether he liked it or not. In the months following the incident, Barron began to make fewer public appearances. While his family remained in the spotlight, he sought out a sense of normalcy, away from the constant pressure. And though he had become a subject of controversy, Barron took comfort in knowing that he had stood up for himself, that he had maintained his composure and dignity in the face of what many saw as unfair treatment. For the rest of America, the restaurant incident remained a point of division. To some, Barron had become a hero, a young man who had stood up to those who sought to silence him because of his family's belief. To others, Barron was a reminder of the political divide that showed no signs of healing, a symbol of the clash between the ideals of the left and the right. The incident sparked debates that still echo in the minds of many. Could the country ever truly come together, or were moments like this just a reminder that the division between people with different views was too deep to bridge? The MAGA hat, Barron's quiet but powerful act of defiance, and the reactions that followed all served to highlight the ways in which symbols and personal choices have the power to shape the national discourse. For Barron, this moment marked a significant turning point in his life. He was no longer just the son of a former president, he had become an individual with his own voice, one that could make a statement even without speaking. His decision to wear the MAGA hat was more than just a political statement, it was a reflection of his beliefs and his right to express them. And even though the world had reacted in ways he might not have anticipated, Barron had emerged from the experience with a new understanding of the complex world he lived in. As time passed, Barron's incident in the restaurant became part of the larger tapestry of political discourse in America. It was a moment that, for some, symbolized the struggle for freedom of expression, and for others, it represented the continued divisiveness that plagued the country. Barron had turned the tables in that restaurant, but the bigger question was whether the nation could ever find a way to turn the tables on the deep divisions that seemed to define it. As time moved on, the Barron Trump restaurant incident began to reverberate far beyond the media and the political divide. It wasn't just the MAGA hat that had caused a stir, it was what the hat symbolized, the larger issues that it touched upon. People across the nation began to engage in discussions about the significance of symbols in modern society. A symbol, in its simplest form, is something that represents something else. It could be an object, a gesture, or even an article of clothing. But what makes symbols powerful is the meaning attached to them. The MAGA hat wasn't just a red piece of fabric with 4 letters printed on it. To many, it represented the rise of populism, nationalism, and a return to what some viewed as traditional values. To others, it represented the exclusion of minorities, anti-immigrant sentiments, and a divisive rhetoric that seemed to permeate every level of public life. Barron's decision to wear the MAGA hat wasn't just about personal choice. It became a political statement that further polarized the country. As the debate surrounding the hat raged on, people began to reflect on the way symbols have the ability to shape public discourse, whether intentionally or not. It brought up a question that many had been grappling with for years. Can symbols, once they gain enough significance, transcend the individual who wears them? Could Barron, by wearing the hat, be seen as embracing a message larger than himself, whether he intended to or not? For many, it wasn't just about the hat, but about the social context that made the hat so potent. They questioned whether individuals should be allowed to wear symbols that might offend others, especially when those symbols have become synonymous with political power and conflict. The incident raised important questions about the limits of free speech in public spaces. Was Barron's right to wear the hat a form of self-expression, or was it an intentional provocation that disrupted the peaceful atmosphere of the restaurant? The controversy surrounding Barron Trump's choice to wear the MAGA hat brought these questions to the forefront of the public consciousness. It sparked debates on college campuses, in local community centers, and around dinner tables across the country. Was it possible for people with opposing views to coexist peacefully in a society where symbols like the MAGA hat had become so charged with meaning? One of the most significant aspects of the Barron Trump incident was the fact that it involved a young person, a teenager. Barron, like many other young people, was coming of age in an era defined by intense political polarization, and unlike previous generations, where political ideologies were often passed down through families, today's youth are exposed to a wider variety of perspectives thanks to social media and global connectivity. For Barron, this meant that his identity was being shaped not just by his parents or his upbringing, but by the larger political environment around him. While many young people grow up in relative political obscurity, Barron's very presence in the public eye meant that every choice he made, whether it was the way he dressed or the things he said, was scrutinized. His decision to wear the MAGA hat was seen by some as a form of rebellion, a way of asserting his personal beliefs in the face of intense media attention. For others, it was viewed as a political statement made by a young man who was still finding his own voice in a world full of conflicting ideologies. The incident also highlighted the role that young people play in today's political discourse. More and more, teenagers and young adults are becoming the face of political movements, from climate change activism to the fight for social justice. For many, Barron's choice to wear the MAGA hat was seen as a reflection of the ways in which youth are being drawn into political battles at an increasingly early age. For Barron, this moment became a reflection of the unique challenges that come with being young in a time of extreme political division. As he faced public criticism and support alike, he was forced to navigate a world where personal expression and political ideology were often inextricably linked. While many teenagers can express themselves without facing national scrutiny, Barron's life was defined by the weight of his family's political legacy. And with that came a level of visibility that most people his age would never experience. While Barron's actions stood at the center of the controversy, it was impossible to ignore the larger context of the Trump family's public image. As the son of former President Donald Trump, Barron was not just an individual, he was a reflection of the values, beliefs, and controversies that had defined his family for years. For years, the Trump family had been at the center of national debates about wealth, power, and influence. Donald Trump's presidency had been marked by a series of polarizing decisions, from immigration policies to his handling of racial issues. The Trump family, particularly Donald, had always been unapologetically outspoken, never shying away from public conflicts or media battles. For many, Barron's actions seemed to reflect the continuation of this legacy. However, as the youngest member of the Trump family, Barron had not yet fully formed his public persona. The incident in the restaurant, where he stood his ground and faced the backlash of the public, made it clear that Barron was not simply following in his father's footsteps, he was carving out his own identity. Yet the public's reaction to Barron was still colored by the family he came from. Those who supported Donald Trump rallied around Barron, seeing him as a victim of political correctness and the intolerance of the left. Others, who opposed the Trump administration, saw Barron's actions as a sign of the deep-rooted values of his family's political belief. For Barron, the incident was a painful reminder of the public perception that would follow him throughout his life. No matter how much he tried to distance himself from the politics of his family, he would always be seen through the lens of his father's legacy. And as the debate surrounding his actions grew, it became clear that Barron would always be a part of the larger conversation about the Trump family and their influence on American politics. In the end, Barron Trump's decision to wear the MAGA hat, and the subsequent fallout, was a powerful reminder of the power of personal choice. It wasn't just about the hat itself, but about the larger conversation it sparked. Barron's decision to assert his right to express himself in a very public way opened the door for debates about freedom of expression, the role of symbols, and the consequences of political polarization. While the incident may have faded from the headlines over time, it left behind a lasting impact. For Barron, it was a moment of growth, a time when he had to confront the realities of being part of one of the most famous families in America. And for the rest of the nation, it was a reminder that even small actions can have far-reaching consequences in a world that is increasingly divided along political lines. Barron's story became more than just about a teenager wearing a hat. It was a symbol of the complex relationship between personal identity, political ideology, and public perception. In a time of deep political division, the story of Barron Trump and his MAGA hat continues to serve as a touchstone for the ongoing debate about what it means to be an individual in a society that is constantly at odds with itself.